The CIA believed that Soviet medics had discovered the secret of telepathy. In the 1980s, the CIA command believed that Soviet scientists had conducted a number of successful experiments in psychic perception. SAP, a declassified CIA U.S. Central Intelligence Agency, report describing alleged psychic experiments in the U.S. shows the confidence of us. Intelligence officials that Soviet scientists were successful in this field. In the 1980s, CIA commanders believed that Soviet scientists had conducted a number of successful extrasensory perception experiments. An April 1991 memo reported that in the USSR significant progress had been made in understanding extrasensory perception. That is, information obtained not through the recognized physical senses, but through intuitive perception of the mind. According to them, one Soviet scientist, a certain Konstantin Buteyko, perfected his method in the early 1980s. Another Soviet scientist, Vladimir Kaznachev, is described as a renowned specialist in psychic perception. The documents were obtained by researcher John Greenwald, author of the Black Vault website and a specialist in Freedom of Information Act, FOIA, information. The 4-page memo discusses both Soviet research on Agent Orange chemicals and psychic treatment at the Institute for Clinical and Experimental Medicine of the USSR. The IKEM was located in Novosibirsk, the third largest city in the country. Buteyko, who died in 2003 at the age of 80, had previously headed the Laboratory of Unconventional Methods of Treatment at the Institute of IKEM. He was known for his research on deep breathing and asthma. According to a declassified document, he also investigated psychic perception. The CIA wrote that the Buteyko method was used by a medical professional to telepathically transmit bioenergy to patients so that they could overcome or be cured of asthma, sinusitis, allergies, chronic bronchitis, pneumonia, and heart disease. Volunteers sat in the middle of the room between two concave mirrors while scientists tried to telepathically transmit energy to the patient. They believed that the mirrors broadcast psychic energy. It is reported that in the mid-1980s, a number of successful SP experiments were conducted by 2 laboratories, the IKEM and another in Leningrad. According to the CIA, Kaznachev was in some way related to the ISKM, but known for his work in biology. He allegedly told the authors of the memo about the experiment when scientists tried to telepathically transmit to each other images of geometric shapes, for example, squares and circles. The memo notes that Kaznachev did not specify whether the Soviet military was interested in the research. The declassified document also provides further context for the study of telepathy and SP experiments in the USSR. The Soviet Union's fascination with psychics has been known for decades. In the late 1960s, former KGB officer Nikolai Kuklov, who fled to the West in 1954, spoke at length about the Russians' experiment. In September 1966, he, according to Atlas Obscura magazine, told a conference that considerable interest in parapsychological research had arisen in Soviet Russia. Kuklov said that Russian psychology had made people particularly susceptible to questions relating to the mystical side of the human psyche and to a world beyond the sober reality of the senses. He then lectured the audience about Russian scientists who had studied extrasensory perception as early as the late 19th century and emphasized that the Soviet government encouraged this kind of research in every way possible. Telepathy and mental weapons. The real experiences of Bernard Kaczynski. At the beginning of the 20th century, at the dawn of radio electronics, many researchers were convinced that it was possible to transmit thoughts with the help of still little-studied radio waves. Moreover, one Soviet physicist succeeded in putting it into practice, but only after the publication of the invention, no one else saw the scientist. In the 20s of the last century, the Soviet physicist Bernard Kaczynski suggested that the transmission of supersensitive information from one organism to another is carried out by means of radio waves. And the human brain is an absolute likeness of a radio station with a transmitter and a receiver. In his opinion, nerve cells have complete analogs of resistance capacitors, inductive coils. Brain neurons also have oscillatory circuits and antennas in their structure. Indeed, these formations had been described by many modern researchers, and nowadays nobody denies their presence in cells and outside cells. It is worth noting that in the early 1920s, almost nothing was known about radio communication, the properties of radio frequencies, and the laws of electromagnetic wave propagation. Short waves, not to mention the VF range, remained a secret behind the 7 seals. That is why Kaczynski believed that telepathic communications were carried out through the VF band. But the most amazing thing is that the engineer was able to experimentally prove his point. In 1922, the physicist began his experiments. He developed a shielding device. A special grounded cage made of fine, meshed metal mesh was supposed to shield electromagnetic mental waves of the subject. Bernard Kaczynski's experiment with the participation of Vladimir Durov, 1923. The first experiment confirmed the electromagnetic hypothesis of the engineer. Here is what he writes in his book Biological Radio Communication, published in 1923. When the cage door was closed, the experimenter V.L. Durov, sitting inside, could not transmit any mental task to the test animal, the dog Mars, who was outside. But as soon as the door was opened, Mars followed his orders exactly. Konstantin Tsiolkovsky wrote of Kaczynski, "The phenomena of telepathy cannot be questioned. Not only a huge amount of relevant factual material has been accumulated, but almost every living family man will not refuse to report about telepathic phenomena he personally experienced. There is an honorable attempt to explain them from the scientific point of view. Such attempt is made by B.B. Kaczynski. He compares the human nervous system with a radio telegraph. He also finds corresponding organs in the body of an animal. Extract from the minutes of the meeting of the Presidium of the Russian Academy of Sciences. Recognize Kaczynski's research in the field of brain radio as promising. Allow Kaczynski to carry out practical experiments in the field of brain radio. Inform the People's Commissariat of Defense in the field of prevention. OGPU about the results." In 1924, the first tests of remote and destructive effects of thought waves on the body were conducted in Moscow. The striking force was the low-frequency waves emitted by the brain radio. The first experiments were conducted on animals, pupils of Vladimir Durov's circus. Having experimentally proved the possibility of telepathic communication and, moreover, the possibility of creating a destructive weapon on the basis of these developments, Bernard Kaczynski signed his own verdict. Fragment of private correspondence between Vladimir Durov and Kaczynski. Dear Bernard Bernardovich, it seems to me that your invention crosses the boundaries of the rational and sensible. I seriously fear for you and your future. By that time, the professor was no longer the sole owner of his invention. The apparatus was closely interested in the Soviet special services. In the fall of 1928, he was summoned to the OGPU, where he was asked a direct question. Is it possible with the help of brain radio to inspire a person with necessary thoughts? Kaczynski had no ready answer. After the conversation at the Lubyanka, no one saw the scientist again. In the 30s, continued experiments to create a means of suggestion, to increase the productivity of people and unite them in a common cause. Moreover, they were quite successful. People perceived the mental orders as their own need for action and uncomplainingly carried them out. After Kaczynski, less scrupulous scientists worked on the development, and a number of monstrous experiments were conducted. Under the guidance of the Soviets, scientists created a machine whose radiation turned 1,000 soldiers into obedient zombies. But it did not come to mass production. The manufacture of the machine was too expensive. In addition, in the mid-30s, it became clear how to control the masses more easily and cheaply. The repressive apparatus was perfectly capable of doing without the brain radio. Kaczynski's invention was classified and sent to a special depository. Give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel.